It was supposed to be a quiet evening back in my own house. A night where I'd slip in unnoticed and surprise Megan with a warm smile and maybe a late dinner. My trip to visit my parents in the neighboring state had been uneventful, and I came home a day earlier than planned without so much as a call to warn her. I wanted the surprise to be simple and sweet. The house greeted me with silence. Everything was where it should be, but there was no sign of Megan. The sound of the front door opening snapped me out of my thoughts. I turned sharply. The sight that greeted me froze me in place. Megan stumbled through the door, her arm draped lazily around a man whose face I couldn't see. Her laughter was loud, slurred, and filled the once quiet space like shattered glass. My eyes went to her first, disheveled hair, a half-unbuttoned blouse, and her underwear swinging absurdly from her finger like a trophy. The smell of alcohol hit me next, sharp and unmistakable. The man supporting her was quick. Too quick. The moment he saw me, he muttered something I couldn't catch, turned on his heel, and disappeared back out the door. I didn't even get a glimpse of his face. Megan barely noticed. Her glassy eyes tried to focus on me, but she swayed unsteadily, a weak, almost pitiful smile on her lips. "Hey, you're home early," she slurred, her words tumbling out in a messy jumble. Then, as if on cue, she collapsed right there in the doorway. Her body crumpled to the floor, motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of her chest. I crouched down, checking her pulse, steady but faint. As my fingers brushed her wrist, she mumbled something unintelligible, her lips barely moving. She wasn't unconscious, just drunk beyond comprehension. I watched her for a moment, my mind caught in a loop of disbelief and questions I wasn't ready to ask. I stood up, letting her lie where she had fallen, and stepped back to lean against the wall. My eyes traveled to the corner of the room, where the small, inconspicuous security camera blinked faintly. The entire scene, the man, the staggering embrace, her collapse, was captured. A silent witness to everything I'd just seen. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, staring at her lifeless sprawl on the floor, the faint murmurs she let out meaningless in the deafening quiet of the house. The oppressive weight of unspoken truths settled over me like a storm cloud. The morning was so interesting that I didn't even expect it. Before heading to bed, I found myself unable to shake the weight of the night's events. Megan was still sprawled by the doorway, her breathing steady but shallow. Her disheveled state and the faint mumbling that escaped her lips filled the house with an oppressive silence. I glanced down at her, my thoughts racing, before I noticed the faint bulge of her phone in her jacket pocket. I reached in carefully, retrieving it without waking her. The phone felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried the answers I both dreaded and needed. I tapped the screen, and it lit up immediately. She hadn't even bothered to lock it. I pressed forward, navigating to her messages. The name stood out like a glaring beacon, Ted. My thumb hovered over the thread for a moment, but I opened it with grim determination. The conversation that unfolded confirmed everything I'd been suspecting and more. Lines of flirtation, intimacy, and explicit promises painted a damning picture. Photos of them together, smiling, laughing, in places she'd told me she was with friends, were interspersed throughout the thread, solidifying the betrayal. I didn't let myself linger. Instead, I methodically took screenshots of everything. Every message, every photo. It wasn't an act of pettiness but one of preparation. Evidence. I forwarded them to my phone, each message a nail in the coffin of what I thought our marriage was. When I finally finished, I set the phone down. Megan continued to mumble incoherently, still half-conscious from the alcohol. She wasn't going to wake any time soon, and I wasn't about to leave her crumpled in the doorway. I bent down and lifted her, carrying her limp body to the couch in the living room. She stirred slightly but didn't wake, settling into a deep, drunken sleep. I stood there for a moment, looking down at her. There was no satisfaction, no triumph in uncovering the truth. Only a cold, heavy resolve. Turning away, I made my way upstairs to our bedroom. The bed felt like a stranger, its comfort tainted by the night's revelations. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying the messages and images in my mind. Sleep didn't come. But the morning was more interesting than I expected. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there, staring at the dark ceiling, the events of the evening playing over and over in my mind like a broken record. Every word, every photo, every lie, it all cycled through my head in an endless loop. Megan's soft, drunken mumbling from downstairs was the only sound in the house, a grim reminder of what I'd uncovered. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the window, I heard movement. The soft creak of the couch, then the shuffle of feet across the living room floor. Megan was awake. I stayed where I was, listening. The faint sound of the shower running told me she'd made her way to the bathroom. She hadn't even thought to come to the bedroom. I waited, the minutes stretching long and slow, until the shower stopped. There was silence again, then the sound of cabinets opening and closing downstairs. She was in the kitchen now. I decided it was time to face her. When I walked into the kitchen, Megan was standing by the counter, her back to me, pouring a cup of coffee. She was dressed in sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, her wet hair hanging loose around her shoulders. She didn't notice me at first. I stood silently in the doorway, watching as she moved with an almost practiced calm. For someone who had spent the night tangled in lies and betrayal, she seemed unnervingly at ease. When she finally turned around and saw me, she froze. The cup in her hand trembled slightly, and her eyes widened in surprise. "Oh," she said, her voice shaky. "I didn't realize you were home." Her reaction told me everything I needed to know. She didn't remember. The drunken haze of the night before had wiped her memory clean. She had no idea what I'd seen, what I knew. "It's unexpected," she continued, forcing a weak smile. "You're back early. I thought you'd be gone until tonight." I didn't respond immediately, letting her unease hang in the air. Finally, I stepped further into the kitchen, my eyes locked on hers. "Yeah," I said evenly. "I decided to come back early." She swallowed hard, her gaze flicking to the coffee cup in her hand as if it might offer her some escape. "Well, do you want some coffee?" she asked, her tone light, almost forced. She was trying to act normal, trying to steer the conversation away from the inevitable. "No," I said, my voice cutting through her attempt at small talk. "What I want is an explanation." Her eyes darted up to meet mine, the color draining from her face. "Explanation," she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't remember, do you?" I asked, taking another step toward her. "Last night. The man. Does any of that sound familiar?" Her hand gripped the coffee cup tighter, her knuckles turning white. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said quickly, the words tumbling out too fast. "You don't know," I said, my tone cold and unyielding. "Let me remind you, then. Who was the man you came home with last night?" Her face twisted into an expression of alarm, but she quickly tried to smooth it over. "Nothing happened," she said defensively. "I was out with my friends, and we ran into some guys. I guess I drank too much, and one of them offered to walk me home. That's all. Nothing happened." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Nothing happened, huh? You expect me to believe that?" "It's the truth," she insisted, her voice rising slightly. "I swear, it wasn't like that." "Wasn't like that?" I repeated, leaning forward. "You know, Megan, we don't have to rely on your memory alone. We've got something better. Video footage." Her breath hitched, and her face paled. "Video?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I nodded, my eyes boring into hers. "There are cameras in the house. Everything from last night was recorded. Everything." Her mouth opened, then closed again, the words she was grasping for failing her. Her hands trembled as she set the coffee cup down on the counter. I didn't," she started, but her voice trailed off. "Let me make this easy for you," I said, pulling out my phone and tapping the screen. I opened the folder of screenshots and slid the phone across the counter toward her. Why don't you explain these? Her eyes widened as she stared down at the messages. Her breath quickened, and she shook her head in disbelief. She began, but I cut her off. Don't lie to me, Megan, I said, my voice hard and unrelenting. Every message, every plan, every excuse. I know everything. So don't insult me with your denials. Her shoulders sagged, and she sank into the nearest chair, her composure crumbling. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Sorry, I repeated, my tone icy. Sorry doesn't erase the lies, Megan. Sorry doesn't undo the betrayal. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. After Megan left the kitchen, I remained at the table, staring blankly at her abandoned phone. Its glossy surface reflected my own distorted expression, a stranger's face etched with exhaustion and disbelief. The silence in the house pressed heavily against me, the weight of her betrayal curling around my chest like a suffocating grip. Rage came first, sharp and overwhelming. How could she? After everything, after all the sacrifices I had made for this marriage, she had thrown it away so casually. The anger coursed through me like fire, burning every lingering shred of denial. I wanted to scream, to shatter something tangible to match the wreckage inside me. But fury is a fleeting beast, and once it burned itself out, it left behind a hollow ache. The sadness was deep and relentless, carving into me with every thought. It wasn't just about the infidelity, it was the loss of trust, the erosion of a bond one had once believed unshakable. The lies, the deceit, they weren't isolated acts but choices she had made over and over again. My mind drifted back to the moments that had led to this. The late nights, the evasive answers, the dismissive laughter when I tried to ask questions. I had silenced my own instincts, telling myself I was overthinking, being paranoid. I'd wanted to trust her so desperately that I had blinded myself to the truth. Now, every ignored doubt and dismissed suspicion felt like a blade twisting in my gut. Memories I had cherished began to warp under the weight of what I now knew. Her laughter, once a source of joy, felt tainted with dishonesty. The mornings we had shared coffee, the plans we had discussed for our future, all of it seemed meaningless, hollow in the shadow of her betrayal. Had any of it been real, or had I been clinging to an illusion? I pressed my palms flat against the table, trying to steady myself against the flood of emotions. There was no way to fix this, no path to undo what had been done. Trust, once shattered, could not be pieced back together. The cracks would always show, an ever-present reminder of what had been lost. This wasn't just about what she had done with Ted. It was about every lie, every excuse, every time she had looked me in the eye and chosen deceit over honesty. Her actions had torn apart the foundation of our marriage, leaving nothing but rubble in their wake. I straightened up, my resolve beginning to solidify. Staying here, trying to pretend we could rebuild what had been destroyed, was not an option. I couldn't live like this, constantly questioning her words, doubting her every action. It would destroy what little was left of me. The sadness remained, heavy and persistent, but alongside it, something new began to take shape: determination. This wasn't the end of my story. It was a chapter, bitter and painful, but a chapter nonetheless. I couldn't let this define me, couldn't let her choices dictate the course of my life. Megan had made her decisions, and now it was time for me to make mine. I couldn't control what she had done, but I could control how I responded. I could choose to walk away, to rebuild, to heal. It was time to pack, time to leave, time to start again. There was no wavering, no uncertainty. I went to the bedroom and pulled my suitcase from the closet, its zipper slicing through the stillness of the house. As I began packing, I mentally mapped the steps ahead: finding a lawyer, securing a place to stay, and starting the process of untangling our shared life. When we exchanged vows, I never imagined it would end like this. I had believed in us, in the life we were building together. But faith in something doesn't make it indestructible. The foundation of our relationship had been shattered, and I couldn't piece it back together. Staying would mean sacrificing what little of myself I still had. Megan had retreated to the bedroom earlier, her pleas for forgiveness ringing hollow. "We can fix this," she'd said. "I'll do anything." But her words were empty. Apologies couldn't rewrite the choices she'd made or erase the lies she'd told. I hadn't followed her. There was nothing left to say. The weight on my chest was still there, but now it was accompanied by a quiet resolve. The next few days were consumed with practicalities. I moved into a spare room at a friend's house, packing only the essentials, a few clothes, my laptop, and a handful of personal items. The house I had once called home became a place I couldn't bear to enter again. It wasn't a refuge anymore. It was a reminder of broken promises and betrayal. Each task felt like peeling back another layer of what we had been. I closed joint accounts, redirected my mail, and cut off every digital tie that still linked us. Deleting her contact information was harder than I expected, but I did it anyway. Each step was necessary, even if it left a sting behind. Nights were the worst. Lying awake in a strange bed, I couldn't stop my thoughts from circling back to the past. I remembered the moments that had once made us happy, quiet mornings, shared dreams, and laughter. But each memory was tainted now, shadowed by what I knew. The warmth I used to feel for her had been replaced by cold clarity. I leaned on my friends during those early days. They didn't try to offer solutions or question my decision. They simply listened, reminding me that I wasn't alone. Their support gave me the strength to move forward, even when the path ahead felt impossibly uncertain. Over time, things began to shift. I found a small apartment across town, a blank slate that felt like a chance to rebuild. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I buried myself in work, took up old hobbies I had forgotten, and started focusing on my own needs for the first time in years. Slowly, the pain began to fade. Looking back, I realized how fragile trust truly is. It's not something that can be patched up or forced back into place. Love may be powerful, but it isn't enough without honesty and respect. Megan had taken those things from me, but I wouldn't let her take my future too. The experience taught me lessons I hadn't expected but needed. I learned that no matter how much you care for someone, you can't make them value you. Staying in a broken relationship doesn't make you stronger, it only breaks you further. And leaving isn't failure. It's choosing yourself when someone else won't. Now, I can finally look ahead. The pain is still there, a dull ache that lingers, but it's no longer all-consuming. Hope has taken its place. This isn't the end of my story, it's the start of something new, a chapter one get to write for myself. Don't settle for someone who chooses lies over loyalty. Don't let fear of change keep you stuck in something that drains your soul. Walking away is hard, but sometimes it's the only way to truly move forward. You're stronger than you think. Do you think leaving was the right decision? I'd appreciate hearing your thoughts. Your words might mean more than you realize.